This is just by way of explaining why I'm in love with this place called the Colorado Plateau, and why I have made 18 trips down there over the last 30 years. It all started when I was a little boy watching John Wayne movies. What fascinated me was not so much the shoot-'em-ups as the landscapes they were doing the shooting in. I promised myself I'd go there one day, and in the fall of 1980, on an overloaded motorcycle, I finally did. I was hooked. As you saw in the opening sequence, the Colorado Plateau is an extraordinary place, visible from space as a huge reddish blob in the middle of the continent. There are colors and shapes and phenomena that just beg to be described in superlatives. It's the closest thing to visiting another planet. Something that has not escaped the attention of Hollywood, which often uses southern Utah as the backdrop for space travel movies. In spite of its name, the Colorado Plateau is mostly not in Colorado. It does cover a small chunk of that state, a little bit of New Mexico, part of northern Arizona, but the most important parts, and certainly my favorite ones, are in southern Utah. Because of the extraordinary nature of its landscape, this area is home to the largest concentration of protected areas in the world, including Arches National Park, Canyonlands National Park, Bryce Canyon National Park, Zion National Park, Capitol Reef National Park, Grand Canyon National Park, Mesa Verde National Park, Canyon de Chelly National Monument, Colorado National Monument, Chaco Culture National Monument, Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park, Cedar Breaks National Monument, Snow Canyon State Park, Kodachrome Basin State Park, Paria Canyon Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness, and many others. There are even a few I haven't visited yet, so that's something to look forward to. The word plateau conjures images of a flat landscape, and indeed much of the Colorado Plateau is flat, as can be seen here, as we do an easy cycle in Chaco Culture National Monument. But you can never go very far before encountering a deep gash in the landscape with, in the distance, the thin sliver of the river responsible for it all. Between 15 and 25 million years ago, relatively recently in geologic time, the entire area of the plateau began to rise. Since the plateau is made up largely of soft sedimentary layers, and since water from precipitation had to go somewhere, it set about carving its way with the help of freezing and thawing. The deepest canyons were carved in the last 5 million years, and most of the landscape we see today was molded into its basic form in just the last 1.6 million years. But let's turn back the clock a few 100 million years, for if the recent geologic history is one of erosion, for most of the life of the plateau it was the story of depositions. It is an exceedingly complex history which I will not attempt to explain. This chart is really useful if you have the time to study it, which we don't. Suffice it to say that over the course of some 300 million years, what we now know as the Pacific Ocean advanced and retreated over the Colorado Plateau no fewer than 19 times, repeatedly turning it into an ocean bottom where marine sediments accumulated, followed by periods where vast wetlands predominated and dinosaurs ruled, or extended dry periods when deserts prevailed and vast sandstorms left us with some of the most beautiful topography that we see today. But who needs a chart when the landscape itself provides a graphic description of the layering process involved in forming the Colorado Plateau? Nowhere else has the Earth so openly revealed its secrets. Much of the sculptural fantasy in canyon country comes from the fact that not all layers have the same consistency and resistance to erosion. Here, the White Rim Sandstone sits atop the much softer Organ Shale Formation. Sometimes this phenomenon leads to pure whimsy, as can be seen in Goblin Valley State Park. This used to be called Mushroom Valley, until somebody decided that calling them goblins would bring in more tourists. Then Hollywood made a movie turning the goblins into monstrous space aliens. Or, as Elfrida Penner suggested, the Manitoba Bison logo. The alternating red and white layers of these hills reflect changing patterns of prevailing winds. For several million years, winds came from one direction where the soils were of a lighter color. Then, for several million years, the winds came from a direction where the soils had been oxidized, giving the red color. So Mother Nature spent several 100 million years building up the plateau, and now it's having fun tearing it all down. One neat byproduct of this process is the formation of arches and natural bridges. Arch forming begins when carbon dioxide and rainwater dissolves the cement that holds the stone's grains of sand together. Once the hole gets started in the sandstone, pieces of rock tend to fall off from the top of the opening. A very small hole can gradually grow to form a window or an arch. Arches National Park has over 1,500 of these formations, although not all of them are as spectacular as landscape arch seen here. In the 1940s, several hundred tons of rock fell off it to create the narrow portion. The area underneath has recently been roped off, as it is feared the rest could fall at any time. This arch is somewhat sturdier, however, and it inspires my daughter Christine into challenging and defeating Darth Vader. Perhaps the most famous of all the arches is Delicate Arch, which has become a kind of symbol for Utah and transformed into a background for their license plate. Natural bridges are similar to arches, but the formation process is different. As the name implies, they are invariably over a creek or river and were formed when the flowing water pushed its way through the soft sandstone. This bridge, and the previous one, are in Natural Bridges National Monument. When the Colorado Plateau rose a full mile above the surrounding landscape, it did not do so evenly. Some sections pushed against each other in a classic mountain formation maneuver and left long and almost impenetrable ridges, such as the Coxcomb seen here and the San Rafael swell in this photo. These upthrusts created major problems for early Mormon pioneers. But the best part is what the water has done in cutting through these ridges. The power of the water can be seen on the walls of this narrow canyon slicing through the San Rafael swell. The slot canyons, as they're called, are wonderfully intimate and enchanting places such as this one in Antelope Canyon in northern Arizona. From where I sit, one can see neither the sun nor the sky, yet all the light is natural, sunlight bouncing off one piece of sandstone to another until it reaches this bottom chamber. This is looking straight up from the bottom of Upper Antelope Canyon at a tumbleweed wedged between the two canyon walls. The water pushing through these slots is powerful enough to move boulders and leave this tree trunk stranded at the top of the picture. It's also powerful enough to kill anyone in its path. These flowers are a tribute to the 11 people who were killed at this spot when a flash flood raced through Lower Antelope Canyon in 1999. When they entered the canyon, there was not a cloud in the sky, but a thunderstorm 10 kilometers away sent a flash flood down the dry creek bed and into the canyon. And this is what happens to you if you don't get out of the way of a flash flood quickly enough. And what does the water do with all the sand it gouges out of the canyons? Why, it creates new sand dunes, starting the whole process over again. These are in Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park in southern Utah. Water, or the absence of it, determines both the geography and the life it supports on the Colorado Plateau. With only between 5 and 9 inches of precipitation per year, sometimes it rains lightly, as can be seen in the pits left by raindrops on this cracked soil. But on the 10 days of the year when it does rain heavily, enormous quantities of water pour through every crack and crevice in the landscape. However, the rocky and sandy soil has so little retentive capacity that a few hours after a downpour, the water is all gone, leaving beautiful patterns on the sandy creek bed, but not very much to nourish plant and animal life. Wave action also caused the patterns on this creek bed, only this one is 100 million years old, perfectly preserved. Not in a museum either. I stumbled across it on a hike. Water pockets like this one look like pools of stagnant water left after a storm. In fact, they are fully functioning ecosystems with a diverse plant and insect life. When the water pocket dries up, they go into a dormant state to revive when the rain returns, whether weeks or months away. Hikers are advised to neither drink nor wash in these pockets, not to protect the hikers, but to protect the life in the water pocket. The desert trumpet is a weird plant. I always thought the bulbous portion was a water reservoir. Turns out it's a gas tank, storing carbon dioxide. This may look like a collection of animal droppings on the desert floor, but the dark tiny mounds are in fact living crusts called cryptobiotic soil. These delicate communities comprise 3/4 of the soil cover of canyon country and, in many ways, hold the whole place in place. A major component of this soil is cyanobacteria, a microbe made up of thin filaments surrounded by sticky sheaths that cling to soil particles and prepare a base for other plants. Unfortunately, these crusts are so fragile that it can take decades to recover from footprints or jeep tracks. What looks like an oil spill on this canyon wall is in fact another living phenomenon. Desert varnish is an effect created by the work of bacteria and microfungi on rock surfaces. Varnish consists of airborne dust as well as clay particles left by water dripping down the canyon walls. Fungi and bacteria cement the clay and dust to the cliff faces, coloring the rock. The variations in color depend on the proportion of iron and manganese and other substances in the composition. The Colorado Plateau is also home to some very old trees, as in 100-million-year-old trees, petrified in glorious color. Petrified Forest National Park is devoted to preserving the best pieces that have managed to escape being transformed into ashtrays and other trinkets. The Colorado Plateau is also home to the oldest living trees on the planet, bristlecone pines. This one in Cedar Breaks National Monument is a relative youngster at only 1,600 years old. Others go up to 4,800 years old. In the recent past, volcanic activity has also made its mark on the landscape, and enormous lava flows are often seen. Although the days where you can see forever in southern Utah are diminishing, most of the time the air is wonderfully pure, the area being quite far from major sources of pollution. The quality of the air also helps to emphasize the incredible colors of the landscape. This is especially true in the morning, usually cloudless, when the very first rays of the sun create a fantasy of light and color. This is my favorite time of day on the Colorado Plateau, and the next segment will take you through the first part of the day, starting, in fact, before sunrise. The music is from a movement of the Grand Canyon Suite entitled, appropriately enough, sunrise.